welcome everybody to another great episode of the Beyond Normal podcast. I'm your host, Kenny Groom. We are in season 6. I can't believe it. We've made it this far. We've got a very special guest today, someone who I've been following for quite some time, their entrepreneur journey. They are a serial entrepreneur in my eyes. And so I thought, why not have this incredible founder on the platform today to share their story with you all. The founder today that we're going to be speaking with, his name is Joah Spearman. He is the founder of TenYour, which is offering an incredible insurance product for those that could be impacted by layoffs and just the dynamics of the job market now. Incredible product. I am a consumer of this product myself. And so I just wanted to bring Joah on and let him share a little bit about his entrepreneur journey. It's really incredible. So without further ado, let's bring Joah to the stage. How's it going there, sir?
Hey, how you doing?
Doing great. Appreciate you, being able to spend some time with us today, letting our viewers know what it's like. In my eyes, I call you a serial entrepreneur. I'm not sure if you go by that or you feel that way.
Definitely.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on number 5 now, so.
Wow, that's incredible. So let's start out. Give folks a little bit. Obviously, we're going to talk about TenYour a little bit, but give folks a little bit of background about Joah prior to you starting TenYour, what you were doing. Like, what was it like being a young a Joah back in the day?
I would say that a lot of the traits came through early. From when I was 4 and 5 years old, my grandmother would ask me what I wanted to be, and I would say business man. So it was very, very clear early that business was something that I had a knack for or desire to pursue. I think in a lot of ways, to be an entrepreneur is to be a futurist. And so since I was a kid, I think initially I was applying my futurism to my own life. I grew up very, very poor, single mother, youngest of 3 boys. And so I was aware of those conditions. And that while I grew up with a lot of love and support from my grandmother and my uncle and my mom, obviously, I also knew that there was opportunity that was beyond what I had access to. And so honestly, I started my first business without really knowing what entrepreneurship was. I was 11 years old and I started cutting grass I borrowed a lawnmower from a neighbor and started cutting grass for neighbors in our like little working class duplex neighborhood. And then in the fall, I would rake leaves. And then at school, I would sell bubble gum. And I would use that money to help pay for my own school clothes. I paid for my own field trip to Washington, D.C. in 8th grade. So I got those early experiences of feeling a sense of pride with not having money so much as like giving myself access to things or opportunities that I otherwise wouldn't have had.
Incredible. Just thinking like the lawn service as a first business, like that is a great way to kind of cut your teeth, right? As a first time.
I'll tell you. So I have 2 older brothers. My middle brother, he and his best friend, who they were both 2 years older than me, and they were cutting grass for our neighbors. I kind of studied their business, and this is me, 11 years old, studying their business. And their business was they'd borrow this lawnmower from a neighbor. They would go knock on our neighbors' doors and say, "Oh, can we cut your grass next weekend?" And they would say, "We'll cut your grass for $20." And so they would get, 5, 6 neighbors would do that. So I'd be like, okay, they're making $100 a weekend and they're splitting it. So they're both getting $50. And I'm like, okay, that's good. But I was like, man, like it doesn't seem like cutting grass is that hard. And so I went to the same neighbor and said, hey, I went to borrow his lawnmower on weekdays. So I would go to the neighbors on like Tuesdays, Wednesdays and say, can I cut your grass for $15? And so
wow.
I went around cutting grass. So basically I price cut and I basically within like one summer, I had all the business. I was cutting like 12 and 15 yards a week, $15 each and making $600-700 a month on my own. So my first Jordan, I remember buying the Kevin Garnett Jordans when they came out for my, it was like, and I say that it worked out because at that same time, my brother's interest in music productions was sparked, and I convinced my mom to buy him a keyboard and equipment to start doing that. Even though I took the lawn mowing away from him, I got him toward music production. So I feel like it worked out.
Yeah, it worked out for sure. Oh my God. I feel like that's a lesson. Like that's like an MBA, like grad school level, like lesson and like business 101 in terms of undercutting your competitors for a strategic advantage.
Hmm.
So speaking of that, learning lessons in business early on in life, you went the college route, you went to university. Tell us a little bit about where you went and then like what that did for you in terms of, maybe sparking or stoking the flame from an entrepreneur perspective.
Yeah. I increasingly, because of the cost of college and also the fact that so many people have college degrees yet don't have real gainful employment, I understand why some people are kind of questioning whether or not college still has value in the way that maybe it did 10, 30, 50, whatever years ago. But for me, college was a big part of my story. I mean, I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college. I worked really hard in high school. I got great grades and was really involved. And I applied. I applied for over 100 scholarships my senior year of high school, and I won 30 of them. So I piecemealed a bunch of everything from 500 to $5,000 scholarships, and I was able to basically pay for myself to go to college at the University of Texas in Austin. My thing is, I wasn't some great student. I think I was like a 2.7 GPA student in college. I mean, I had a few semesters where I got a 4.0 or 3.5. Academics wasn't my focus. My focus was access. So I went to college really to get access
Mm.
for myself, knowing that no one in my family had that kind of access. My first semester on campus, the first thing I did, I remember I went to class the first few weeks. I got the syllabus for all the classes, and I kind of made a decision. I was like, okay, I can work really hard academically and get A's, or I can save some of that time and I can work full time. And I decided to work full time. So I got a job. I called and emailed the athletic director for the University of Texas, the Texas Longhorns, every day for 30 days. And then I eventually got a job in the media relations PR department for the Texas Longhorns. So all 4 years of college, I did media relations. I learned how to do media training, press conferences, doing game day stats for ESPN for the basketball team, football team, helping to run Texas relays. So I got really valuable experience and access just by being at a really big public university. And so I think that actually is what prepared me most for entrepreneurship as a professional, more than like going to the classes.
I think that's a gem there because like you knew yourself, right? You knew what you wanted to get out of that situation and you're paying all that money anyways. Like you said, you got scholarships, but somebody's paying all that money.
Mhm,
Tuitions are rather,
mhm. Even way more
rather
now.
high.
I think
Yeah, they're way more
when I was
now,
going,
right?
I think it was like $4,000 a semester for tuition. I think now it's like,
Hmm.
14,000 or something.
Yeah, exactly. So, but you knew yourself to know, like, hey, here's how you get the most out of this situation, being in this university, the network, the access, like you talked about. I'm curious, like, what do you tell, like, what's your advice if you're talking to somebody now who, could be similar story to you? They have that entrepreneur, that they have that skill set, that DNA in them at a young age, but they also want to navigate college, and now the costs are what they are, like you
Yeah.
mentioned. Like, what advice would you give somebody who wants to go into entrepreneurship but is looking at that university as a route?
Yeah. I think if there, I don't want to say it's a regret. It's not a regret. But if there's one thing that I didn't do in college, one thing that I'm really proud of is I've made some lifelong relationships, friendships, connections in college where even investors in my last business are people I met in college 20 plus years ago. So knew how to build relationships and not just networking from a transactional standpoint, but really building real friendships and relationships. But I think to that end, one thing that I would recommend to anyone who's entrepreneurial in college is you have at least 4 years where you have an amazing opportunity to both dabble in a safe kind of beta like environment with different business ideas, different things like that. But I think even more so, I think college is a great place to find co-founders potentially, whether that's people who are studying, let's say you need a technical co-founder, find out people in the computer science program. Let's say you need a business co-founder, find someone that's studying business. Let's say you want something like more like an advisor or a mentor, a future board member, like maybe that's a professor or a faculty member. And the thing is in college, people are really eager for connection like that. So whether it's a professor that they see a younger version of themselves, or someone who's willing to take more of a risky path and like maybe going into academia, I just think there's so many opportunities for people in college to use the fact that it's kind of a closed environment to build relationships that can pay huge dividends in their entrepreneurial career.
Yeah, that's dope. Being a part of the university that you were part of as well, like I think it's one of the universities where there's this network,
Hmm.
right, where you can kind of do business in
Yeah.
Texas, for example. You don't have to necessarily say, "Hey, let me boil the ocean. Let me do the whole entire world. Like, let me start in this one place
Yep.
where there's tons of value to
Yeah, I mean,
unlock."
it's like look, Facebook. Obviously, Zuckerberg started that at a Harvard. When I started Localer years later, it was it was on the backs of a belief that Austin was enough. Like I like in Atlanta, they have these shirts and the hats and stuff, and says Atlanta only needs Atlanta. And
Hmm.
from like a music industry standpoint, you can see that like I mean, there's a whole ecosystem out of hip hop that Atlanta has just kind of lifted itself to the stage that's in with Organized Noise, with Outkast and So Def with Jermaine
Hmm.
Dupri and all that. And from there, and Austin's the same way with local businesses. And I saw that in college. Companies like Dell Computers started at the University of Texas campus. Tito's Vodka started in Austin. It's now the biggest vodka company in the world. Whole Foods started in Austin. So there's very much like a buy and support local ethos that was there. And so by the time I started my first businesses, my purview was like, hey, if I can make this work in Austin, then that may be enough.
Hmm. So you mentioned Localer. That is the previous business. You spent a long time building that out into what it was. Can you talk a little bit about you know, you starting that, some of the learnings from running that for the amount of time that you did, what, 7, 8 years maybe? And then where that company is now, because we know that you're focusing on TenYour.
Yeah. So I mentioned that, TenYour is number 5 company for me. And before Localer and before TenYour, I had 3 other businesses. One I still have, which is a social media kind of executive communications company working with clients. Like my first client actually was FedEx back in 2009. Now I have a few CEOs as clients of different businesses, from startups that have raised a seed round up to $150 million organizations, where I'm mostly just kind of sharing thought leadership and in CEO support. My second business actually was a sneaker boutique in downtown Austin that I had for a few years doing brick and mortar retail. From that experience, I closed the sneaker shop, and then I created and ran the first ever fashion and style segment of South by Southwest Festival. But with each of those few businesses, with the sneaker stores in particular and in the South by Southwest event, I only did those for a couple of 2 or 3 years. And those experiences were really rich. But I decided after that, I was like, man, I really want to, my next company, I want it to be something that I feel like I can do for at least 7 years. So when Localer came about, I remember meeting with my first investor, and I committed to him. I told him I was going to do this for at least 7 years through hell or high water. And there was a lot of hell and high water. I ended up actually, because of the pandemic, ended up tacking on more years. So I found it Localer in December of 2012 and ran it for over 10 years. And actually, just last week, a week ago today, actually, I just managed to facilitate a transaction in which I bought out in essence, did a debt buyout of my investors. And now I'm the sole owner of Localer. And so I still continue to run the business, but unfortunately, after the pandemic, it just wasn't going to have the kind of venture sized acquisition outcomes that we wanted. And so it just made more sense for me to take over as a sole owner, making it more of a lifestyle business where it generates revenue, but nothing that's venture sized at the time. So that's still going in the background. But that experience doing something for 10, 11 years through good times, bad times, through the pandemic. I mean, I think I've experienced everything you can possibly experience as an entrepreneur: fundraising, team building, having to fire people, landing partnerships with big companies like JetBlue and Nike and Lyft, Match.com, scaling from just Austin users to users in 200 cities around the world, language translation, different mediums from apps to website to print, like we did it all. So all that experience is getting poured into anything I do in the future. And immediately it's getting poured into in a TenYour. I feel like my next venture, it would take me maybe a year and a half to get where it took me 10 years to get localer. And here I am month 10 into TenYour, and we've already eclipsed where localer was in year 10.
Yeah, I love to see like you're able to apply all those learnings, whether good or bad, right? And there's an acceleration that happens. I'm curious, like all the things you went through as a founder, like you mentioned, the highs, the lows. You're hiring, you're firing, you're doing all those things that come with the job. Like, how do you maintain your mental health through all these situations?
That's a great question. Honestly, maybe the most important question that founders should be asked that are often not asked. I say this from experience because I faced some very, very, very dark and challenging times from a mental health standpoint. In mostly in as after the pandemic, like 2022 was a very, very tough. The end of 2022 was very brutal. I spent that, post pandemic, I spent probably 6 months just pivoting the business to survive the pandemic. And I'll say this, we had our best quarter ever in Q4 of 2019. We were on the verge of having our best quarter ever Q1 of 2020. And it was that year, 2020 was lining up to be a breakthrough year for localer. And this is after 7+ years grinding on this thing. And then the pandemic hits and we basically lose 95% of our business like that. And basically spent the next 6 months doing a hard turn on the business, and then really just grinding for a couple of years, working towards trying to land some type of exit, and having really fruitful acquisition conversations with some of the biggest tech and finance and credit card companies you can think of in the world. And there were some great conversations that, it felt like we were on the doorstep of finally getting that breakthrough, maybe getting that exit that was going to be attractive to us as myself as a founder, my team, and then our investors. And at the end of 22, they just didn't happen. And it was like the season where all those big tech layoffs started happening and the interest rates going up. And it just was perfect storm of not a good moment for us. And, and it was, and I can, I'll say openly, for the first time in my life, there was a couple of months, the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, where I was at an all-time low. I was near suicidal. And I know that there are some founders who've shared that they've had those experiences, but not many. And now I'm super open about it. I put so much of myself into the business and also into trying to pursue this outcome and feeling the weight of I had this cap table with all these investors, people counting on me. And it was just heavy. And my lead investor, I should also mention, was just a phenomenal man. And he passed away several years before due to an unexpected heart attack. Obviously, I guess they're all unexpected. And I just felt like such a high level of responsibility to honor his investment and trust in me and all my investors. And it was a lot of pressure that I was putting on myself. And I think that led to after those acquisition talks ended. I mean, I remember I woke up in a San Francisco hotel room at 4 a.m. And honestly, I was contemplating ending my life. And it was, I felt like, and that was a week after getting all these rejections from these companies saying, after all the good conversations we had, we don't think we're going to be able to do it and all this stuff. And it was just, I felt like, man, I had just wasted 10 years of my life and I didn't have anything to show for it. But coming out of that, in high part leaning on my faith, leaning on good friends, it helped me to see that, hey, even without that big outcome, that big financial outcome, there is so much that I gained in those 10 years. And honestly, maybe I gained more in that experience as a person and as a leader and as an entrepreneur than even if I did have that outcome with that business. And now that's kind of part of what's pointing me into not just TenYour, but my life going forward. So I feel like I'm already starting to reap the benefits of getting through that tough time.
That transparency, man, is definitely appreciated. Like you said, there aren't enough. I don't know if there's not enough founders talking about it, or it just doesn't bubble up enough with just all the stuff that's out there. But it doesn't seem like there's enough resources for founders specifically when they're going through something stressful like you went through, somebody telling you a lot of no's for something that you worked so long for, you put a lot of blood, sweat, equity into, to have folks just kind of shutting the door on that, seeing those dreams not necessarily play out the way you want
Mhm.
to. But, I'm glad to be here with you today. And I definitely appreciate you using your platform across all social media networks to really make sure folks know that mental health is something serious that should be prioritized.
Thank you. And one thing I would just say too is, founders, I think we put a lot of the pressure on ourselves. Obviously, we're pursuing a vision, a passion. We're leading a team for fundraising, all these things. I think even right now, in the last year and a half, and this is partially why I'm focused on tenure. A lot of people in general, and over the last, I think, 15 years, post recession, I think millennials in particular, we put so much of our identity into our work and into the companies we work
Mm-hmm.
for, the job titles we have, the pay we get. This post recession era in the 2010s, 2020s, it's so much emphasis has been on like getting the bag and having a certain title and all this stuff. And while that's impressive and important in some ways, I think we've put so much emphasis on it that even it's not just founders who are experiencing these moments of mental health low points. I
Mm-hmm.
think within this last year and a half, we've seen so many layoffs in the industry like tech, for example. And it's been very tough for people to have the not just dealing with the burnout and the whiplash effect of the pandemic shutting down things, but then racing back to work and intensity, and then now being laid off. And I think that it's just really important for people to really try to think about how to get themselves peace of mind, even beyond their jobs. And so much of, you mentioned tenure as an insurance company, and I would say we're insurance like in what our product is, but really we're a peace of mind company. Like a lot of what the reason why I'm doing this is because growing up, poor as I did, as I said, my mom never making more than $50,000 in a year, and you know, working two and three jobs, and just seeing that struggle, I just see how much it weighs on people to not have peace of mind, especially financial. It's really important for people to figure out how they can get a sense of self and a sense of identity and peace of mind that isn't always just attached to their job or their business. And I'm saying that from experience of not necessarily doing the best at that for some years and now really prioritizing that.
I love that. So you touched on a lot there, but I just want to pivot a little bit in terms of existing outside of work, existing outside of your 9 to 5, or even running your business as a founder or CEO. I think that you have an activity that you go to quite a bit. You want to tell folks what it's prevalent if anybody has followed you on social media, but tell folks a little bit about your activity that you're all in
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
outside of the work stuff, all the businesses and things that you're running.
Yeah. So I mentioned when I was 11, I started my first business. And in that following year, I started my lifelong kind of passion, which is distance running. So at 12 years old, I realized I had two older brothers who were 6'2", 6'3". I probably wasn't going to be beating them at basketball or football. So I decided to start running. I started running track, and then in high school I added cross country. And I just kept it as a lifelong interest. And so in the last couple of years, especially during those tough times I mentioned in 2022, I really dug in deeper into the running. And I've always done races and 10Ks and marathons and stuff. But these last couple of years, I've gotten into ultra marathoning. So now I'm running. I did a 50-mile race last November. I've done 3 30-mile plus races this year. I had another one on deck later this summer, and then another 50-miler later this year. So it's really been a place for me to meditate, to kind of be still. And obviously I'm running, but be still mentally and spiritually. When I was younger, I think running was a time where I would be working through business ideas and coming up with ideas and going through my to-do list and things like that. And now, honestly, I'll go run 3, 4, 5 hours solo and be working actively to not think about that stuff at all, and just really getting to a place of peace and clarity. And then I come back fresh to the business and things like that. So it's something that I've built friendships out of. I mean, my best friend I met through high school cross country practice. My kind of like surrogate father was my middle school and high school track coach. So many of my good friends I met through running, and very much like entrepreneurship and tech. I've built a community and friendships and network through this passion. And so it's been there for me very much like a good friend for almost 30 years now.
Yeah, I love the just a way to escape like the thinking. You're probably thinking about so many different ideas on any given day, just with the businesses that you run. And so having that outlet, yeah, I think that's really cool. I think everybody should have those outlets, right? Where it's not necessarily like there's no KPI, there's no metric, right? You're doing it because it does something for you, it fulfills you,
Yeah.
right? That's
Well,
really
I
the
will
only
say
metric.
that there is a KPI for that, but it's Strava. it's a
Oh, got it.
it's kind of like it's am I more fit now than I was 3 months ago? But it has no
Got it.
it
Got
has
it.
no attachment to like my business or my livelihood. Like I'm not counting on
Yeah.
running for sponsorships or money. If anything, running is a place where I spend a lot of money because I'm like traveling to run these races. And I just qualified for the
Hmm.
Boston Marathon, so I'm already scheming on like, okay, am I going to do it next year or not? That kind of thing.
That's so cool, man. I commend people who can get out there, and that's a similar. Like I've heard people who are into running talk about like I don't know if it's called like runner's high or whatever, but it's like you get into
Yes,
it
it's real.
and there's nothing in your
It is
way,
real.
and you're just
It's
focusing
real. You know
on.
what? The only thing I can compare runner's high to as an entrepreneur is when you're gelling as a team, when you're in a flow, like I mentioned, I said Q4 of 2019 was our best quarter ever, and Q1 of 2020 was about. I felt we were in this, we were gelling. It was like all those years pouring into Localer, we were in flow. It was like the meetings were going well. People were starting to get to where they wanted to sign contracts. Things were happening, and it was just flowing. And that's the only thing I can compare to runner's high, where it's like the first couple of miles of any run are hard. Because you're just like you have to get your body moving. But then there's something switches where you stop thinking about what you have to do and you start just doing it, and you get into a
Mhm.
flow. And the longer you run, the more you can get yourself to a place of staying in that. Like I've had mornings where I'm in runner's high for like 3 hours, which is just unreal.
Oof. Yeah.
And but I've also had months in the business where it's like, man, this month just like blew by, just everything clicked. It was all firing.
Mhm.
And you have that. And but a lot of what the ultra marathon has taught me is you really you're really trying to get yourself to prepare for they a lot of runners call it the pain cave. And it's like when
Mhm.
anyone can be good when they feel runner's high. It's about when you don't feel that and you don't feel good.
Oh yeah, got to push
And that
through.
entrepreneurship is just like that. It's like it's not gonna things aren't gonna be clicking. You're gonna have to, maybe you're gonna have to switch up your team, and maybe you're gonna have to pivot and change your business model, all these different things. You have to be prepared for that stuff. And so that's what I think my experience with Localer has equipped me with going forward.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about tenure.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what is the product, like you said, it's more of a peace of mind for folks in the current market. Talk a little bit about that, what people can expect,
Yeah.
if they go to the site and they start figuring out how they can use the
Yeah, that's
service.
great. So the idea for tenure came from two places, one from professional experience and one from lived experience. The lived experience piece I'll mention first because it's the most important. I grew up, again, a single mom. She's working 2, 3 jobs, and I remember my mom in her 20s. My brothers and I were all in elementary school, I believe. My mom was laid off from a job, and she's a sole provider for 3 boys and herself, and she's laid off. And so that's a tough time for her. Thankfully, she followed that up by getting a lot of job stability. She's had jobs for 8 and 9 years back to back in the time since then. And from watching her through that, and I think what it informed in me is this idea of peace of mind, this idea that, like, man, my mom was like, we were living hand to mouth, check to check, week to week for so many years. And that just wears on you, the stress of that, and then not having the ability to really think long term financially. But what I learned so much is my mom, even through all that, my mom was thinking about generational wealth somehow. I don't know how, because she didn't grow up in it, but she fought tooth and nail, and she bought her first house at 45 years old, and she graduated from college at 55 and then got another degree at 60. So my mom is just someone who's just eternally driven and has stayed consistent. And then that's the lived experience piece. The professional experience piece is that 6 years ago, I got invited to this retreat in Omaha, Nebraska, where Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company, is based, and basically spent a weekend learning the ins and outs of their business. And a lot of people think about Warren Buffett, they think about investing, but they don't realize that actually the big flywheel of their business is Geico insurance, and how it's such a big piece of what makes that business go, both in generating premiums and revenue, and also flow with that they're able to invest. And so TenYour, in essence, what we've done is combine those two experience sets and say, what would it look like to offer people who are in a predicament around a layoff peace of mind where, yes, of course, they're thinking short term in that moment about paying for their bills and finding a new job and things like that. But how do we help them to still keep some focus on a long term goal like generational wealth? And so the way that TenYour works is in essence, we provide a form of financial assistance to people that allows them to ideally not max out their credit cards, not empty their savings, not make short-sighted financial decisions that prevent them from building generational wealth. And so it's something that I'm really passionate about. It's something that we really need, especially in communities of color. I'm really proud that most of our customers to date across the country are women, unmarried women, or people of color, people who are maybe the main breadwinners in their families, people who are maybe the first person in their family working in tech or working in an industry making close to six figures or six figures. So really focused on helping middle-class professionals have peace of mind, both with the downside risk of something like a layoff, but then the upside of building generational wealth for their families.
Yeah, I love that the combination of the two. The story goes so well. Like you said, you have this lived experience with it, and then we know that there's big brands out there. We all have insurance in some form or
Mm-hmm.
fashion. These companies are definitely leveraging those pools of assets, and so folks need to have some form of security. Just with the current job market, it is crazy right
Current
now,
and
and
future
so.
with with AI and all that, it's like the
Mhm.
reality is this moment in layoffs, unemployment is very low. It has been very low in the United States, like 4% below the several years. But what isn't really being reported is that a lot of the times the employment is counting part-time work. It's counting people who don't necessarily have income, like really strong income. They're still relying on different things, here and there to make it piecemeal and make it work. And with the rise of AI, more jobs in the future could be threatened. So it's really important that people be thinking about employment as, I kind of tell people all the time that everything we have is a subscription. TenYour is product is a
Mhm.
subscription, but rent is a subscription. A mortgage is a subscription. A car payment is a subscription.
Mhm.
A job is also a subscription where they're buying your time for those wages. And so it's
Mhm.
really important that you should always be reviewing your subscriptions, like both at the Spotify, Hulu, HBO Max, whatever level, but then also at the employment, housing, car kind of level. And so a lot of what we're trying to do with TenYour is give people a way to kind of subscribe to peace of mind and generational wealth at the same time.
Yeah, I love it. So tell folks how can people connect with the
Yeah.
brand, start seeing, what tools and tiers of the 10-year product are relevant to them.
Yeah. So the first way to start, I would say, is if you go to tenyour.com, and that's TenYour, is if you go there, you're going to see a video with my mother and I sharing a lot of her life experience and thinking about generational wealth, which I think is really just motivational, inspirational, whether that's her experience or not. And then second, you're going to see something that says it's a button on there that says see if you qualify. And it's a 3-minute online survey, and it'll in essence ask you a few questions, and it allows us to see if tenure is something that makes sense to you. And I'll tell you, if you do that survey, you will hear from me if you qualify. About a third of the people who do it do qualify based on their job history, income levels, etc. And I personally reach out to them and follow up and say, hey, like I would love to get 15 minutes with you to talk about tenure and share with you what it is exactly. So that's what I would recommend people to do is go to the website, start there. We'll be coming. We've been more or less in stealth for the last 9 months or so, but we're going to be coming out of that soon. We have some great funding partners, already raised some institutional funding. And so we're going to be coming out of stealth more fully soon. And I'm really looking forward to that so people can really access it even more.
Yeah, that's awesome. I can't wait. I already used the product, so I appreciate you for offering it to me
Yeah.
early, Joah. Working for startups, which I've been doing for the last couple of years, it's just always good for me to have just an
Yeah.
additional kind of safety net for myself and my family to keep us secure.
Yeah.
You have shared so much with us. Your journey is incredible. You are a serial entrepreneur in my eyes. I'm excited to see what you're going to do with TenYour and just all the other endeavors that you have now already on your plate or the ones that you're thinking of. In closing, I want to give it to you. All right, what do you want our listeners to leave this conversation with? We always give it to our guests to close us out. What do you want folks to remember from this conversation that we had?
I really hope that they remember that the lessons come from everywhere. The lessons came from watching my brother and his friend cut grass. They came from watching my mom respond to a layoff. They came from my college bosses when I was working for the Texas Longhorns, who taught me more about entrepreneurship, honestly, than anyone in tech individually has. The lessons come from everywhere. And mostly I've learned that the lessons actually come the most from struggle. If you have it easy, then it's not that the growth isn't happening, but not nearly the kind of growth that happens when you're struggling and facing challenges, overcoming challenges. So I think that is just really important that, I think a lot of times people look at millennials, look at Gen Z, and they say, oh, we want it too easily. We're too entitled. What I would say is, I think that we are actually a couple of generations that have already faced so much adversity in our careers, both starting with the recession 15 plus years ago, now the pandemic and the rise of AI. I think just having to respond to that, not having the kind of security that previous generations were offered, if they got a high school diploma or a college degree, or got in a union membership, I think that we're a very resilient couple of generations. And I think the important thing is not to necessarily pursue ease as much as to lean into where those struggles are to pursue growth. And whether you want to pursue entrepreneurship or not, if you pursue growth, I think that that's actually what's going to be fruitful for you in your entire career, financially, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. I have a young college sophomore she just finished her sophomore year, who I've mentored for several years now. And she was struggling her freshman year of college, being away from family and friends. And she was like, oh, I'm thinking about transferring, getting closer to home. And I told her, I was like, hey, you're a really capable caterpillar right now. And you're going through that growth phase of deciding, like, are you going to become a butterfly? And it's like, there's nothing wrong with caterpillars. Caterpillars are awesome. But you have to choose. Do you want to be able to fly and roam and have more access than you would as a caterpillar? You're on the ground, you're moving slow.
Mm-hmm.
But as a butterfly, you can see a lot more. So it's kind of like that. You got to decide, like, do you want to metamorphize or whatever? Do you want to transform in that way? So for me,
Mm-hmm.
like the experience that I mentioned with Localer and the lows mental health wise, now I'm sitting here a year plus later, realizing that may have been the most formative personal and professional experience I have ever had and ever will have.
Mm-hmm. I love it, man. Your transparency, you're leveraging your platform to give people honest dialogue on founder journeys and just what excites you, like things like running. I enjoy seeing it. And I'm really looking forward to being a customer of TenYour moving forward and just seeing where you take the company. Thank you for being on. And thanks for our listeners for tuning in to another great episode of the Beyond Normal podcast.
Thank you.